So, welcome to week 7. Well done last week for the presentations that you did. We really enjoyed it, and we also really appreciate just how difficult it would have been for all of you to put all of that work together in what was a really short space of time. So, for us sitting there watching you present, it was actually a real pleasure to actually see the amount of quality of work and the quality of research and the quality of the presentations that you've all managed to do in what was otherwise a really busy period for you all with your exams and your other courses. So I just wanted to say thank you for doing that, and it was really good for us to see what you've done. And actually, it's really interesting for the other groups as well to kind of see the other projects too. So I think overall there was some fantastic work, and we're really pleased that you did it. So well done to you. And the next presentation now probably won't be for a number of weeks, so you can relax with that. And effectively, as of today, you are now effectively working independently as a designer within your team. But you will have to check in with your team in regards to what you're doing and how you're doing it as part of the process. But that's normal when you're working in a design company anyway. So it's all good. So effectively what we're doing now is moving on to concept design. So you are going to be working independently for now, and you should be taking that team brief that you had from the other group and actually starting to work through what that means to you. But the definition of that is, its approximate description is a technological, functional and aesthetic form of a product which is in development. That's quite a dry interpretation, but when you break down those three areas, technically it kind of does cover them. And the functional being in relation to the user, the aesthetic being in relation to how it looks and how cool it is and the details, and the technological being in relation obviously to the obvious, how it actually physically functions or how it's manufactured. But in relation to the form of the product, really what you're doing at the minute is you're just taking that research that you had before, and at this stage you're not worried too much about where the project's going to go. You're not worried too much about how much of a cool idea it is or a good idea or a bad idea, but what you really want is a lot of scope and direction in relation to the concepts that you're now going to generate. And I want you to be quite open and free form in the next few weeks in relation to where you take it, but effectively you can interpret the brief in your own way and do whatever you like. And you need to communicate that through depiction of good ideas, expressed through your sketches, and if models are appropriate to make to help describe your ideas, then effectively you should do that also. So developing ideas, expressing intentions, testing out your theory is part of the point of what we're doing now. So you might have an idea in your head. What we want you to do is to go and test it out in terms of sketches. So in terms of a conversation, a sketch is worth 1,000 words and a model's worth 1,000 sketches. So if you're sketching and drawing and making things and you find you've got a little bit stuck, what you need to move forward to doing is actually physically prototyping something out in paper and card and maybe actually testing that with somebody. What you'll find is that'll give you a lot of feedback into your concept work beyond just the drawing. So I wouldn't advise returning here in say 4 weeks time with just 2 pages of sketches. What you should probably have is maybe 15 to 20 pages of sketches and around 3 really well thought through concepts that you're going to present back to your team, and part of that might include a couple of models along the way as well. So all of that research that you've done from the other team that's been given to you should give you plenty of flexibility and direction to kind of interpret that brief in your own way. It may be that teams are all on the same page, but you'll find that out as you move forward. But a good brief should give you solid drivers for exploration and resolve to the issues that you found out. The team brief that you were given, and there's a number of things that you can pull from that when you're actually looking at it. So when you're working on your own, have a look at the insights that were generally gained in terms of the methods that were used. They'll give you the kind of things to consider and things to address, like sort of around here. And then you've got the brief summary, which is basically just the intended project outcomes. That's kind of what your project needs to deliver in the brief summary here. Now what you might find is that as you move forward, the brief kind of redefines itself and takes on a slightly different form. As your concepts move forward and you redefine what your concept is and where the focus goes, that brief might actually shape up a bit or actually define itself more clearly. At the minute it's quite open. Problem statement is what you'll probably use in your ideation session or your brainstorm this week. But that can be really good just for helping you think about ideas in an open way. And then of course you've got the specifications down the bottom for what your concepts need to deliver. So these could be nice clues to kind of push your project forward, but as you're developing concepts further on, what you can do is you can come back to the brief and just check that the concepts you've got are actually meeting these things here in the specifications that the brief says they needs to meet. Now, if you've changed the specification or you've built in new specifications, that's fine, as long as you've done that through a process of investigation. But you should be in a position to discuss with your group when you come back after Easter how each of the 3 concepts you have meets the specifications that were defined in the brief. And if you've changed it, if you've added some or taken some away, you need to be able to explain how and why you've done that and where that information's come from, because that's quite a critical thing to just change the brief, unless you've got a very, very valid reason to do so. So always refer back to your brief to check components are in line with the project requirements as and when you're working. It keeps you on track and it stops your project wandering off too far. And it also means when you sit down with the client or us, you can tell us in a justified way how what you've designed meets the original brief that you were given by the other team. In terms of how you concepting out, you want to try and keep it loose and you want to explore ideas and have a bit of fun and be blue sky. At this stage, we're not too worried about what the outcome is. We just want you to kind of have a bit of fun with it and challenge it, which is why we're having a brainstorm this week. But essentially, in terms of how you do that on paper, use different mediums, use colours, use characters to communicate, annotate things, change views. These are sketches here I did in industry years ago. These are really old now, but what's nice here is this one sort of tells a story. So it's 3D, you've got a detailed view of a clip here. This is where the pole slides, and then this story sort of shows someone actually engaging with the product, right through to, you know, this contextual image here of the parent and the child. This one up here was for a toy design, and it was just exploring different forms and different shapes. So I'm doing thumbnail sketches here and actually kind of working through each shape and form till I find one that I like. I think I probably took this one and then rendered it up here a bit better and put some annotations on, but then I did a side view as well. This was a radio design. It's all done with pencils and markers. Started out with thumbnail sketch here, bigger sketch here, and then this sketch I think, and then this one, and then this one, these two, and then this was a final rendering, and this was a detailed view. And then there's a model made down here out of foam, or wood, I think it was made at the time. So what I'm saying is you play around with how you're concepting out. You're not trying to be the world's best artist. What you're trying to do is learn to draw better, and you're trying to make use of the marker pens. You've got blue pencil, black pencil, however you want to do it, but you should really be filling page after page of drawing. If you want to get good at drawing, it's not going to happen by just doing a couple of pages when we ask you to do something. It'll come from you spending hours and hours churning through 30 pages of sketches per project, and maybe 3 of those pages will have good work on them. And then you can use Photoshop and then take the best sketches and bring them together. But at this stage, you want you to have some fun, explore ideas, be blue sky. Blue sky means think out the box, be a little bit different. Don't worry about the limitations just yet. Don't worry too much about the specifications just yet. Just kind of have a bit of fun with the project and then see which ones kind of bode well a little bit further on. So yeah, it's important that you take this part of the project seriously. It can't really be underestimated in terms of the value of what concept design does for your project success. You need to put the groundwork in now. Effectively, all of the work you put in at this stage will determine how much of an easy ride you have at the other end, because you've obviously got to argue why your product makes sense. But also in terms of detailing it and finishing it, it's easier to do when you've got a good concept to work on. Number one, it's more enjoyable, but on top of that, it actually makes more sense to work on something which actually makes sense. You know, it's more fun. So this is the stage now where you have to put the work in. So it says here, for example, a good idea or concept can be implemented poorly in the finished product, which is true. You can have a great idea and ruin the finish. But if you have a poor concept, a bad concept by comparison, it's very hard to turn that into a successful product and to dress it up and make it look nice, unless of course you're doing hero shots, you can maybe get away with it. But in terms of it hitting the market and making sense, it's not going to fly. So this part here, the concept stage, the ideation stage, is where the crux of the problem is. And they reckon that around 85% of all product costs and manufacturing materials, environmental impacts, they're all determined at the concept stage, the ideation stage of the design process. That's where everything's created. Once you move on beyond that, once you start to commit to ideas and commit to materials and commit to manufacture, then you're piling in a lot of money and time on what could be just 1 or 2 ideas. So at this stage, you have to make sure that you're taking the right one forwards, because if you make a mistake later on, it's going to cost you. So the concept stage is really important, and there's a tendency for students to kind of do a couple of pages of sketches and just try and pick one and move forward with it. What you'll find is that if you're either very, very lucky and you have a happy accident, you'll be okay, but the chances of that are quite slim. You need to have hundreds of ideas, and then you start to select and filter down the ones that you really need. Then you can pick the one or two that make sense, and then you should have a good project. So put the groundwork in now to ensure that your project has got good depth. In terms of concept direction, there's a couple of approaches that you might use. The first one is convergent thinking. This is when you tend to work on one idea and then you just build upon it. You just add more detail, you expand it. If you're building a radio, for example, you might be thinking about where the buttons go or how the clips go or where it's used or how it's used, materials for use, what it looks like. But it's very, very linear. You're always working along this line here. So designers follow an analytical process for designing one thing and design it in a sequential manner. Steps 1, step 2, step 3, and it works its way along linear. It has less flexibility, but it will give you more of an integral finish. So you'll have a much stronger finish from a linear process. And then divergent thinking is just more openness to explore flexibility in brief requirements. So you're basically being blue sky. You might look at one idea, you might look at something else, suggest something else. Now, both of these processes have relevance at different times. You might have a concept that you really like that's come out of divergent thinking, and then you might apply convergent thinking to it to develop the idea a little bit further. And then you might find that you got stuck, and then you might move back to divergent thinking with the stage you're at with convergent thinking. So you might get so far through the project on developing the radio, and then you realise that actually it's not cool enough, it's not funky enough. So you might go back to being open and blue sky to kind of come up with new ideas, and then you go back to convergent. So it's for you to command it, it's for you to work out how you do it. It's really about working out when and where you need convergent thinking and when and where you need divergent thinking, to think more lateral or to think more sequential. And that's also down to how you use your team. You might be quite sequential in terms of pulling your project together, but then if you get stuck, what you can do is pull the group together and say, I need to explore some ideas. And in fact, having a group ideation session is divergent thinking because you're bringing people together from different backgrounds which are divergent. And that in itself will give you a range of ideas. And then you can retire back to the bedroom and continue to work on your projects in your own way, which is then being more convergent. So it's about thinking convergently and divergently, and then, but most importantly, knowing where and when you need to use both of them is really important, and then how you can implement them really well. When do you need to involve others and when you don't, and when you can work on your own and when you don't. But these are the two approaches in terms of thinking that you might start to use when you're working through your project work. Yeah, really cool. So the plan for the next few weeks, basically we're in week 7. So in your lab this week, you're just going to develop an individual response to the team brief. And then in the lab, you're going to discuss that with the rest of the group. You're going to talk to the rest of the group about your ideas, and you're going to have a brainstorm. And then you're going to move away from that with some concepts from the team. And then you're going to use some sketches and markers to design the project. And you're going to be divergent at this stage now. During Easter, those 3 weeks, it would be ideal if you could try and develop the project a little bit in your own time. It really would help. The way I've kind of laid this out here is quite light, but essentially in the first week, you could continue to develop a range of ideas in varied scope. You can be blue sky with that. A couple of days would be good, or a full day, it's up to you. But to try and find one day in the first week to kind of work on this would really help you out, or 2 half days. Again, using markers and pencils, whatever you want. Just be divergent in your approach. Think blue sky. And then in the second week, you maybe want to start to focus in on 2 or 3 good ideas. But to work out which ones you think are good ideas, you might want to rough prototype some of these out. So you might want to get some card or some paper and start pulling them together and testing out the shape and the form and how it works with just basic materials, because that will help you move forward beyond the sketch. But it will also help you to work out which of these 2 or 3 good ideas are a good idea to take forward a result. So you're starting to be more convergent. You've been a little bit divergent, a bit convergent. You might need to think divergently about solving some of the problems, but be convergent with how you move forwards. By the last week of Easter, you really should have 2 or 3 ideas with more detail that you think are worth presenting back to the team from your project. You could do some user tests with your prototypes, get someone to try one out and observe how that goes. Repeat the techniques that you learned in your research with some of these new ideas to add validity to them, to actually find out if they make sense. So when you talk to the group, you can actually kind of prove why you think it's a good idea, because you've actually gone through that process. You're now really converging on 2 or 3 ideas. When you come back in week 8, you're going to bring it to the session, and we're going to have a crit session with the rest of the group, and you're going to present with the rest of your team to me and Barrow. You're going to talk to us just informally about your 3 concept ideas and how you develop them, how you know they're a good idea, what's the process you've been through, and the rest of the group is going to discuss this with you, and then we'll move on to a next phase in week 8 where as a group you'll move forward with these ideas and discuss what you're going to do next. So it's really important, if you're going to be in week 8, you need to be coming back in after Easter with at least 3 good concepts, but know why they make sense. Have lots of development behind them, some testing where applicable to kind of back up your choice. And behind that, you should have a range of work, almost in a conical shape coming out like this. You should have lots and lots of sketches here, a few less sketches here because you're now choosing a few to develop, so you're becoming more convergent and linear. And right down here you should just have 1 or 2 or 3 good ideas that you're developing in a linear fashion, in a convergent fashion, to add detail to them to present here. So you should have quite a lot of work to kind of discuss. But this is why we're here. This is a design project, and effectively you've got 5 full weeks here to actually pull this together. So make the most of it, because after that we'll be detailing things out, and this will be your first design project in semester 1. Further research and testing ideas. If you're actually going to be developing a design, it could be cool to make sure then that you adhere to the specifications that you originally set out in the brief. There may be new ones you've got, or there may be ones you're looking at from the brief that you were given, but make sure that when you're developing your ideas, when you're coming back to your chosen concepts here, make sure they actually kind of match up nicely against the specification. There'd be no point just having 3 concepts you think are good and saying, oh, I really like these. Make sure those 3 concepts that you've chosen actually make sense in relation to what the brief wanted. And if at this point you've changed the brief and you've added something to the brief and you've redefined it from your own sort of direction to some simple degree, make sure you know why and how. And you can use some of these specification checks by building a basic prototype and testing it out with the user in the same first-hand approach that you used before. This helps you close the loop and justify the decisions that you're making. And when your team say, why have you done that? You can say, well, I've done it through this way. I tested it out with this person. These concepts make sense and they all meet the brief. So what do we do from here? And then that's what you can do. That's a really nice place to be. It's a strong place to be, and it's a confident place to be. And essentially in second year of design school, that's kind of how you should be thinking. In terms of how you might show that to the group, this is what I was trying to show you last week. You could just build basic paper prototypes. This is one I did in my final year. I was developing a trolley system, and Joseph here was very kindly mocking up my design and using it in a scenario that I'd created, and it was just for him to fold it up at the time, but I wanted to see how easy it was for him to use, and just the paper was an easy way of making the form and shape, and I just took pictures throughout to show this process. There were things I learned from it at the time which aren't explained on this board, but some of it was due to posture, some of it was due to how the zips work, some of it was due to kind of how the whole thing folded up and the amount of space it took overall. But this kind of approach is a good way for you to test out your prototypes, think like a designer and present like a designer to the rest of the team. And of course, when you're doing your final presentation, you'll have some work there to show from your concept development phase that's not just sketches. Some people are more comfortable making and photography than they are drawing. So if you find that your drawing's a little bit weak and you need more time for it, maybe you can make up your skills on the research side of things in terms of how you communicate visually like this. So the team brainstorm session, collaboration can give results that are greater than the sum of all the parts. So 1 + 1 = 3. So if you send to working on your own, you're going to be limited in relation to the ideas that you can have. If you work with someone else and you're bouncing ideas about between you, they're only limited also. But between the two of you, you can actually come up with something really brilliant that neither of you would have thought about by yourself. So 1 + 1 = 3. Now, if you have a bigger group, then obviously that's exponential. So the best collaborators have strengths that you lack as well. So the people that you're working with in the team, good people are very, very different to you. If you tend to work with someone that's just like you, although it might feel great and you have great ideas to some degree and you sort of pat each other on the back, it doesn't necessarily mean you're thinking differently. What you have to try and do is to work with people which are very, very different to you and have very, very different backgrounds to you, different characteristics, personalities and experiences, because they are the things that will gel and bounce ideas around between yourself and them that you otherwise wouldn't have thought of if you were working with someone who's very similar to you. So the best collaborators have strengths that you lack and vice versa. They're not always like you. It is the difference between you that matters. But also what you could say is that the people in your team that may be quiet, for example, not as loud as others, they actually might be the people that have the ideas. It took me years to work this one out because I was quite vocal, but actually the people in the team that have less to say are maybe also the thinkers. So what you have to recognise, if there's someone in the group that's a bit quiet, how can you help them feel comfortable to engage? How can you help them contribute and make them feel that they want to add value to the team, and maybe they have the idea that you're looking for? The question is how you get them to speak up and feel comfortable about it. That's a skill. And a good manager, a good leader rather, knows how to do that, knows how to make people come forwards. So use the team around you, encourage those of you that are a little bit more quiet than others. And then what you'll find is if you have a diverse team, which most of you do, you're more likely to have really, really cool ideas, which is why we're doing a brainstorm. So these are general rules that we're going to put out in the brainstorm this week. Obvious ones like state the problem, ideas to be discussed, be very clear, be visual, draw things, number your ideas, stay focused on tasks, keep ideas flowing. All the general brainstorm rules that we follow all the time, and we're going to be using these. Deferred judgment's really important, that we don't judge the ideas too quickly and that we encourage wild ones. What we want is lots and lots of ideas, quantity of ideas, wild ideas, the better. Every idea is valid. Everyone gets a chance to talk, but have fun with it and try and pull as much out as possible. It's the best chance you've got to springboard your Easter work. In terms of how you'll run the session, there'll be a timed 15-minute session per person. So every person will get an opportunity to explain your direction that you developed this week so far, show the group your concept so far, but make sure you're very, very clear what you want from the team. There may be something specific you want in relation to you want them to add value to your project in a certain way. Or it might be that actually you just want general ideas in terms of where they think they could go with it, or that you just want to talk about the concepts you developed and how you can maybe do them differently or what you can add. But have a think about what you want from your team before you go in, just in case that you might think, well, actually I could use my team for this or that. It's really good, important, and it's really good to do that. Keep track of time. And make sure that everybody keeps the 15-minute loop moving around. You don't want to be getting stuck for, say, 20, 30 minutes because then it gets tiring. Keep it snappy and keep it quick. 15 minutes each. If you have a small group of 4, maybe you can stretch it to 20. Some groups have got about 6 per team, so you'll have to kind of manage your time. But on average, we're doing about 15 minutes each. And that should take us around the 2 hours quite nicely, with a little bit of a gap at the end and a little bit of time at the start to set up as well. But a lot of these things will sort of take off as the group starts and find their own pace. But try and give everybody equal time to talk, and try and give everybody equal attention to their project. Even though it is a group project, we're treating it independently at the minute. So things that you can ask in terms of ideation, asking questions. We did Scamper before, so there's combine in there, there's substitute, adapt, eliminate, reverse. There's other things in there like magnify. So what can you add? What can you duplicate to an idea? What extra value can you add? What can you multiply or exaggerate? And then alternatively, what can you minimize in someone's concepts? What can you subtract or miniaturize, lighten or split up or take away? So these are just some key things, some key words and key phrases that you can potentially combine and add to someone's concept sketches. If you're not quite sure what to contribute to the group session, maybe you could use some of these as prompts. So if you're looking at someone's torch design, you might think, well, what components can do another job or add a function? So you might think, well, how else can we add a component to a torch that might make it more useful for the user? How can we adapt it? Elimination, what parts can we take away? If we took the bulb away, it wouldn't be a very good torch, but maybe we can take the handle away. Well, you might actually think if you took the torch bulb away, how else can you provide illumination without the torch? Maybe they might design a jacket that illuminates. So elimination is a really good one to kind of force ideas. But you can use some of these prompts in your session just independently. If you're stuck and you're not quite sure what to contribute, have a look down some of the list and sort of look across to the right and think, well, if I was to do one of these things, if I was to magnify or if I was to rearrange the components in this design, what would I suggest we could do? This might help you generate a few ideas. And just again, the quietest person is sometimes the one with the really good ideas. Help them speak up. So if someone's not really contributing at this stage, try and encourage them a little bit or see what they think. Help them out. Force a word association is a really nice way to do it. So choosing random words in a brainstorm helps the brain find depths of knowledge that are synonymous with your experiences. You can do this any way you want. You can think up any set of random words you like, use a newspaper, magazine, a dictionary, or your head. It's completely up to you. And then try and force fit those words against the concepts or the problems you're having in your design project and see what comes from that. So, for example, on the left, I put down tower, fish, run, disc, brass, Africa, joker, handle, dollar, time, fruit, and dive. None of these words are relative to a torch whatsoever, or a child to some degree. But for example, if I take the word fish and torch, well, you think to yourself, well, maybe you could add scales to the handle, so you change the way the grip works. How can you design a grip that's kind of maybe waterproof or grip proof when wet? Maybe the grip could be bendy, or the torch could be bendy. When you think about fish, you can get schools of fish. So you could have schools of light. In other words, you might have more than one bulb. You might have a collection of bulbs which are working independently in a different way. How that would work, maybe there are wires, maybe they hang, maybe they flourish, maybe they float, maybe they're on the end of an umbrella. It's up to you. Or you could have bolt-on components, etc. Because if you're thinking about how fish could maybe be in a tin. Tins kind of like stacked together, so maybe you could like bolt different components on, to the torch. If you think about Africa, and a torch, maybe you can use sand to stabilize the torch. Maybe it's reactive in low light. Maybe it has a tribal decoration on it or beads to kind of make the grip feel nice, or it hangs from a tree with the beads. Because in Africa, maybe they don't have, in certain parts of it, they don't have access to electricity. Maybe there's dynamo that you could put into the torch, and maybe you can even actually build in a water filter. Maybe the torch itself could have a UV light in it and actually purifies water when camping, for example. And if you take the word time and torch, you could have a section that opens up for storage within the torch, like the hands of a clock. It kind of opens up. You could have numbered use for mapping of the torch, so to help someone navigate and know where to press and when to press. It could be light sensitive, so it turns on when it gets dark. You could have a location tracker in it, so children go out late at night, maybe they need to come home on time for parents, so parents need to know where children are, so the torch could have a location tracker, or even indeed an alarm for safety. And of course, some clocks and timepieces wind up, so maybe the torch itself can be a wind up torch. Maybe it doesn't need batteries anymore. So you can see how you can kind of force ideas on torch just from picking random words like fish, Africa, and time. So if you want in your brainstorm, you can do the kind of scamper approach to kind of approaching someone's ideas, or you can do the word association. So if you're running your brainstorm session, if you're the one that's running it, maybe what you might want to do is sit down and write down a list of words that you think are random, or get the group to come up with a list of words for say 2 or 3 minutes, and then as you're running your session, you get that group to kind of force fit those words against the torch concepts or the ideas you come up with or the problems that you might have, and see what comes up. You never know, could be fun. So 2 more types of ideas: build ideas and jump ideas. Builds are really when you're building on the ideas of others, you're adding value and further detail, improvements, iterations, features and functions. Builds are more linear. It's where someone's maybe talking about their concept and you want to add value to it. You could do this or you could do that as well. Why don't you do this too? That's a nice build. But jumps can be where you're looking at someone's torch design and you think, well, actually, we could do something completely differently. Jumps kind of like there can be another idea altogether. They use the current idea to leap to something completely new. They generally tend to be both ideas in terms of the narrative of what comes out of a group brainstorm. If you're not really sure about how to jump to something new, if you're not really sure how to kind of think of something differently, kind of using this approach is a jump method. You're kind of using these words down here to force jumps. I was thinking about jumps here. This is kind of forcing you out of a linear approach to being more lateral. But a build approach might be something like this. How can you modify? How can you modify the idea? How can you combine different elements? So this is more like a build approach, but also jump in places, especially when you eliminate. So yeah, builds and jumps, 2 different methods of approach. If you're not sure and you can't come up with radical ideas, try and build on the ideas of others. Try and help them make their idea better. Add some value to it, a feature, a function, whatever you want. This one's a safe one to play. This one takes a little bit more thinking, but there are approaches to it like this that you can use to come up with more jump ideas. Cool. So yeah, that's one way of looking at it. In the last 15 minutes of the session, what we want you to do is take a look at the ideas in the table generated throughout, and then what you want you to do is kind of maybe look and see if there's anything that you can combine from those concepts generated between those in the team. Maybe there might be, say, 3 or 4 ideas that came out through the session that are really cool. Can you combine any of them together to generate a new concept or new idea from those ideas from each of the team members that can then be taken by everybody, if you want, to explore as a separate concept in further detail? You're going to take these things much further anyway over Easter. So even if you all left the team session with one idea that was combined from others, you're all going to develop that in your own way, hopefully. But it's worth doing that at the end, because there'll be so much that comes out of a good session. And it's a good way to finish, to spot further opportunities to build on concepts or jump to new ideas from those that have already been generated before you leave. So this is something we want to do right at the end of the session just to close off, but it might actually help you out over Easter. And that's it, and that's all we're going to do. So I'll see you in the session this week, and yeah, good luck over Easter, and then yeah, good stuff. Cheers.